Senator Uggan, did you have the floor when we ended last night? There's an amendment that you've circulated. Do you wish to address it? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there was an amendment that was circulated, and it has FBA Junior up top, and it incorporates all of the proposed amendments that were adopted yesterday as we concluded session. Mr. Speaker, I provided it for information for all of our colleagues. But I'd like to also bring to the attention of our colleagues, Mr. Speaker, and yourself, that there's one component that is missing that the good senator from the good chairman of health, the Committee on Health, apparently had moved that the 10% component in item number 9 be broken up to reflect 5 and 5, and the remaining 5% be allocated specifically for what the good senator from Talafofu, now Deputy, have proffered previously that day, and that amendment was adopted. So what you have before you is reflective of the changes that I have moved and that were adopted, but it does not include the item that the good senator from Talafofu, Deputy, also proffered, and that it was accepted based on the mover of that amendment by the chair of the Committee on Health. So, Mr. Speaker, I hope I didn't confuse anyone, but it's just sub-item 9 should be broken up into 2 components. 5% specifically for the Department of Revenue Tax, the other remaining 5%, which is an amendment that was adopted yesterday, would reflect the financial management system that was proffered by the good senator from Talafofu/Deputy. So with the exception of that, Mr. Speaker, this is reflective of the amendments that I have proffered. But as you read this, there was something that Speaker Wanta had brought to my attention, and she wanted to ensure that this is highlighted as an annual continuous appropriation. So, Mr. Speaker, based on the proposed amendment that you have before you, I'd like to move on, and I apologize because the line numbers are not there, but on line number 2 of the proposed amendment, where it reads, is hereby continuously appropriated, to insert the word annually right after appropriated.
So at the end of line 2, just before not, we put annually.
Yes, that's correct, Mr. Speaker.
All right. Is everybody clear? Is this everybody's understanding of where we are at in this section? He's actually, yeah. Yes, he's just providing this so that all of us understand what we think we did yesterday, and then you can see what we were doing yesterday on one sheet.
And the purpose, Mr. Speaker,
and the only amendment that he's actually offering right now is on line 2, between
after the word
appropriated and not, to put annually on his sheet. Annually. He wants to put continuously appropriated annually. I'm not sure that's...
So the existing language would continue to remain there, is hereby continuously appropriated annually. And the purpose for that, Mr. Speaker, is because some components here would be reflective of a funding source to address an annualized debt service. And that's where the concern of the good speaker from Malolo had shared her recommendation for that additional amendment. And should that amendment pass, Mr. Speaker, I do have one other issue.
Any objection to continuously appropriated annually? Hearing none,
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, just one other issue, if the sponsor of the legislation would mind yielding. And sub-item number 10, it reads, the remaining 3% of the remaining balance shall be a source of funding for island-wide school bus shelters. And to me, that identifies that it shall be a source of funding, so obviously the 3% will be set aside, but it may not necessarily be appropriated for that purpose. So if the intent was to ensure that it be part of the continuous appropriation on an annual basis, then I think the language has to be consistent with some of the verbiage that I have proposed yesterday. Just a concern on one issue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for allowing me to answer the question. Actually, if you look on all items, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, the dollar amounts for that are fixed because these will be debt obligations for monies to go to Simon Sanchez High School, GCC, UOG, and other capital improvement projects. When you come now to 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, those are based on a percentage, and that's an annual appropriations as well. So if we're bringing in about 8.5 million, then those numbers are, just to give an example, the 80% for Simon Sanchez will be 3.2 million. And then the 7% for both the children and the childhood program is 281 million. Those will be split between the two. 10% for DRT is 100,000. The 3% for the buses is 120,000 shelters. So that's the amount every year that, for this particular amount at 8.5. If they bring in 10%, then it's 80% of what after the total of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And yes, and that will be annually appropriated. You look puzzled. Shall I, want me to explain it?
No, please.
In detail?
No.
Mr. Speaker, if I can just conclude, I understand that the intent is to obviously ensure that this subsection also is part of the continuous appropriation, but the way I read it, and I may be corrected by our legal counsel or any of our colleagues here, it says shall be a source of funding rather than shall be for island-wide school bus shelters, because then that language will be consistent with all the other subsections in terms of allocating it specifically for that. But I may be corrected by our good legal counsel from the minority or our legal counsel, but just for purposes of clarity, Mr. Speaker.
Legal counsel will be do you want to give legal counsel the authority to make 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 consistent?
Consistent, yes. So moved, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
Senator Yamashita, please.
Or not on the amendment that he's, okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the amendment on number 8, other than the portions designated to be used for items, in items 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of this subsection, 3.5% of the remaining balance for Ifo Mogonta Child Adolescent Services Division of the Guam Behavioral Health and Wellness Center. Mr. Speaker, I'm asking the body to consider amending that to say, for the remaining balance for Ifo Mogonta Child Adolescent Service Division of the Guam Behavioral Health and Wellness Center and Project Carryover of the Department of Public Health and Social Services. And Mr. Speaker, the reason is because children's mental health starts with the babies, and we find the babies at Project Carryover.
Anyone wish to be heard on that? Any senator, any objection? Senator Rodriguez, you'll have to amend your proposed amendment to include that. Or let's make sure that we include it in your amendment.
Thank you.
Yes, but he's amending 8 completely, and I just don't want to lose. Yes, that's why I want to make sure that we amend it together, so that when he introduces and passes his, we don't lose Project Carino. So, Senator Rodriguez, do you want to offer your amendment, and then we'll add Project Carino at the end of it? Oh, is it? Oh, okay. Okay, so she's amending Senator Rodriguez to add Project Carino at the very end. All right, fine. Any objection to Project Carino being added? Senator Nicholas?
Just a question for the author of the amendment. I fully support Project Carino. They do great work. But I do understand that their grant does have their grant that has basically got them up and running and that's fully funding their operation is set to expire in a limited number of years. And so I just wanted to clarify with this appropriation, what happens in the event that the grant were to expire and it were not to be renewed?
Do you yield?
Thank you for that question. If I understood the question correctly, yes, in fact, we're in our last year. We're attempting to get carryover. We've had many, many challenges with this particular grant from SAMHSA. And so the Terry Uggan, project director, and his team are trying to save the carryover funds. This small amount of money, the $140,500 that would be split between Project Carino and Ifo-Magonta will not sustain the entire program, but it will help. And I think the message that the committee chairperson on health made yesterday is that the statement is being made that we do need to support and sustain these programs. So as the senator from Talafofo, Ordetito, is raising, we will need to proceed in the budget hearings that are coming in front of us about how we can sustain and move forward. So this won't totally take care of Project Carino as we enter our 5th and 6th years, but I think the message is that there's some money and that we have the intentions of trying to sustain. I'm not sure I answered the question, but that's...
Is that sufficient, Senator Stiglitz? Does that answer your question?
It does, Mr. Speaker. I'm just... the way the language is originally being proffered right now, it permanently secures that funding source for that particular program. My question, though, is if the program were to be discontinued, let's say they don't get any more money, and Project Carino is no longer able to get all of that federal funding, what happens to this appropriation if there's no more Project Carino? Does the money go to Project Carino, but there's no more Project Carino, or does it go back to the fund? How does that work then?
I think there are 2 other programs here that are going to be splitting whatever that money. Rather than a 3-way split, it's a 2-way split. This is going to Adolescent Services Division, the Guam Behavioral, Ifo-Magonta Child Division. So it's either going to be a 3 or a 4-way split. And when Carino goes, then it goes down to a 3.
All right, I'm satisfied. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Except I would ask that we do everything we can to keep Project Carino in place. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other senator wish to be heard on the main motion? Senator Ben Pangilinan.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, I want to, apologize for my absence yesterday. I just was not able to be here. I have a standing appointment that requires me to be out for most of the day. And I look at what the legislative body has done with this bill, and, we are now tacking unrelated appropriations to the subject matter of the bill, and they basically are all non-germane. And what we're doing, I think, is we really don't have any idea in terms of the impact that this has on the budget, on the revenues, on the changes that are being proposed. and feel that they are not appropriate to be taken. This is more like a supplemental appropriations bill already, with all of these unrelated appropriations and reprogramming of the resources for the operations of the departments and agencies. We started out with the bill for Sanchez and renovation of the schools, snuck in the early childhood, even though it's not related to Sanchez. And, you know, we reported this out to the body and very much reluctantly, but, you know, I have the reputation of not reporting out people's bills. So I said, let the body decide, knowing that we're going to have to raise these issues and so forth. And I'm going to question the germaneness of all of the amendments in here with regards to what we're trying to do. I think we don't have a fiscal note from the Department of Bureau of Budget and Management as required for all appropriations. So we don't know what the impact is from their perspective with regards to the appropriations here. And so, Madam, Mr. Speaker, I question the germaneness of some of these amendments that have been adopted and as chairman of the Committee on Appropriations, because it really, you know, kind of creates the shotgun approach that we have taken in the past, that we have kind of curtailed in that practice in this body, to our credit, so that we do have an idea of where we're going with regards to the resources of this government, and that when we do these appropriations, there is in fact resources to support it. I just can't tell you right now if there's any of the resources that are being done here. We understand that the bill also contains a reprogramming of money that has already been allotted to DOE, certified by BBMR, for payment at JFK, and now it's going to go to Simon Sanchez in the bill, but that money is not available because it has already been allotted, because it was in the budget this year to pay for the operations and maintenance of JFK, insurance and maintenance of JFK, and now that money, which has been allotted and for DOE, and I don't know if they received it. They said they got 100% of their allotment. We haven't been able to verify if they've received the cash, but the allotment has been released, has been approved for the JFK project, and now in this bill we're saying, no, we're not going to use that money for Simon Sanchez. It creates a shortfall at JFK in this year's budget for the Department of Education. So these kind of changes that are being proposed, once again, I say, you know, is putting into question, in my opinion, without the input of the administration, of its impact on the budget that has been passed, whether or not we're doing something here that may not be able to be carried out and does not fit within the budget authorities that are in place and this government is operating for at this time. So I also want to kind of frame this question of what we're trying to do with allocation of all of these revenues future, which we don't know what they're going to be. The issue of the shortfall of the Territorial Education Facilities Fund, when we had the Special Economic Service meeting to send a recommendation to the legislature for FY 2013 budget, it was very clear at that meeting, when we were approving the 2013, that the governor's estimate, developed by BBMR, DOA, and the Director of Revenue and Taxation with regards to the Territorial Educational Facilities Fund, was that they were going to be short by approximately $9 million. That what was budgeted and allocated in the governor's budget submittal was not going to be the revenues realized based on the analysis by the Office of Finance and Budget, that cash would be collected. At that meeting, the OPA questioned that, the Office of Finance and Budget questioned that, the Director of Revenue and Taxation, the Director of BBMR, and the Director of Department of Administration assured and went on the record that the $9 million in increase A large portion of that was the escape assessment increase in revenues, that it was not all based upon the triannual assessment and that they were going to collect that money. We said, I don't believe that's the case. And what would happen if the money is not collected? And the assurances given by the Director of Administration, by DOA, and BBMR, that they have discussed this issue with the governor and his fiscal policy team, and that the governor is committed to making that shortfall, that they urge us to accept the increase in revenues for the TEFF, they recommend it, and that any shortfall, the governor, if given the transfer authority, which he was given, if given the quote-unquote lump sum budget, which he was given, would use the other resources of the collections of this government to make up for that shortfall. Based on those assurances, and we have the record of these assurances, the legislature accepted the additional revenues, and we went forward and adopted those revenues. In the first quarter of fiscal year 2013, Office of Finance and Budget tracks these revenue projections. We noted that there was going to be a problem. The governor must have been so sure that he was going to make his commitment whole and that he was speaking the truth when he said and told his administrators and his fiscal policy team that if there were additional revenue over and above the current collections of the real estate taxes was not going to be done, that he will make it up. He was so sure, I guess, because in the release of the allotments to the Department of Education in the first and second quarter of fiscal year 2013, they released the entire amount of the TEFF collection in the allotment schedule. In what they released, they cited the source of the release of those allotments as the TEFF collections. And so once again, when we saw that in April of the following year, in March, April, June, we sent letters to the Department of Administration, to BBMR, and to the superintendent, and advised him the tracking for the TEFF is going to show $9 million shortfall at this time from the Office of Finance and Budget. You have been given the allotment based on that increased revenue. The governor has assured us that he will make up that shortfall from other sources of this government. What are you doing to make sure that happens so that at the end of fiscal year 2013, even if those collections do not come in for the TEFF, that you're not going to be deducted and your future allotments will not be reduced by that $9 million. Superintendent, every time we talk to him, 4 or 5 times, informally and in formal letters to both the director of BBMR and to the governor, that the tracking shows that there's going to be a shortage. What are you going to do when the time comes to release that funds? Every time we said that, the governor, through his representatives, and the superintendent has assured us, don't worry, we are working with Adelup. They will release that money. They will give us and make up the difference because they have assured us. And I said, I don't have to worry. I will continue to monitor the situation. And up until the end of the fiscal year, when we saw what happened, and it happened exactly as we predicted, exactly as the Office of Finance and Budget and my office predicted, that the governor will release their allotments from the other appropriations to DOE to make up for that $9 million that they have released in allotments. And so today, what are we arguing about? We're arguing about the governor not keeping his word. The governor lying to the superintendent accepting that lie, that he will make up that difference because he has not. And the superintendent keeps telling us, we're working with Adelup, we're working with Adelup. They have assured us that we're going to release that money. And today we find ourselves arguing, where's the $9 million? And Adelup's coming back and saying, oh, it's short because the TEFF collections did not achieve what was adopted in the budget, which the governor and his administration and fiscal policy team assured the legislature recommended to the legislature that they will collect that 29 million, first of all, that they will collect it, and that if they do not collect it, the governor will make up the difference in his transfer authority. Today, we find out that revenues were not collected, and the governor is not making up that shortfall, and in fact has reduced the allotment from the other revenue sources in which the revenue came in above projections. So even though the revenue came in above projections, in the other revenue source, he still, rather than giving that increase in revenue to DOE to make up for that $9 million shortfall in the appropriation authority, he used it for other things, instead of prioritizing education as he promised during that process. So we're arguing now. I'm not arguing. I'm very clear in what happened. I'm telling the truth, the whole truth, and the governor's trying to spin the truth now and saying, I can't release that money because the revenues are short. We told you that. You told us, don't worry. You have the authority in the budget. We gave him the authority in the budget, but he doesn't use that authority to fulfill his commitment and his promise. He used that authority to pay other things within the government of Guam, other things that have been waiting for years, and maybe that's a good thing. But what it does is it creates a crisis in the Department of Education at this time. If he releases that $9 million, that could go directly to Sanchez right now, and part of this bill is not necessary. And that's what we've urged him to do. That's what we continue to urge him to do. So when we look at this and we look at what's happening, we look at the context of what was approved last night by the Department of Education Board as a transmittal for the needs of the department and their plans for the allocation of the $300 million budget. It's part of it is to fix Sanchez and so forth. So when we looked at these bills, we feel, and the recommendation of as chair of the Committee on Appropriations, is that these bills really should be, and we've asked and talked to the author, but she asked, will you report the bills out? And as chairman, we conducted the hearing, we had the report, we have our concerns, and so we circulated the bill to report it out, and this body is going to consider it. Should we act in this way? From the advice of the Office of Finance and Budget and the advice of myself as chairman of the Committee on Appropriations, I think actions on this bill at this time are premature. That we really should step back a little bit, take a look at where we're appropriating the revenues from. Are they going to be there? Are they going to be there? What happens if the increase in revenue from the triennial assessment is only $2 million and we're appropriating $8 million? We don't know that. Should we do it now? If the governor will release the $9 million, then we don't have the pressure, political pressure, to do something immediately and things like this and future dollars that we don't know exist. And so I'm just saying that the position of the chair is that really, we tried as much as we can to pay deference, and unfortunately, it's the Speaker's bill, and unfortunately, she feels that I have withheld her bills in committee on other matters, and I just want to get past that. I want my working relationship to improve with her, so even if I don't agree with the bill, I'm going to report it out and then put it to this body in terms of my concerns. That my commitment is to report it out, but I still have a duty as a senator, as chairman of the Committee on Appropriations, as oversight of the Office of Finance Budget, to inform the body of what the ramifications are and whether or not this is the most prudent and physically responsible way to approach these kind of issues. And I say, and I ask the body, that it is physically prudent to discuss them, but to commit ourselves to these issues without having these questions answered at this time, I think creates havoc in our budgeting process and how we're going to consider the revenues coming to the government of Guam in present dollars to support future needs of the Department of Education. And I think we need, if we're going to do these kind of things with all these differing appropriations, then we should do this in a supplemental budget bill so that we know all of the parts that will move when we do all of these separate appropriations for different operations of the government of Guam. And that's the purpose of a supplemental budget. So if we're going to do these things, I ask the body to consider that we don't act on these bills at this time, that we go back to the committee, we continue to work and take a look at what's being proposed. We bring back in the Department of Revenue and Taxation. This is the same body that assured us that that's how much money they're going to collect, and it didn't come in. What gives them the confidence that it's going to? You know, it's like the tourism numbers. We're saying, let's go ahead and increase TAF and so forth because we have record number of tourists. Sure, we may have 1.1 million tourists, but we had 1 million last year. And we kind of said, oh, so we're going to get this much in TAF revenues or GRT revenues, more appropriately for regards to some of the issues that we're going to be supporting the appropriations we're making. But we find out that when 1 million tourists were coming, they were spending $600 per tourist. Now that we got 1.1 million because of the problem with the yield of the yen on the foreign exchange market, the 1.1 million tourists are now spending $500. So rather than increasing GRT with 1.1 because we increased by 100, we're reducing GRT because they're spending less, each tourist is spending less money. Yeah, we got that additional 100,000 tourists that's spending 500, but the million tourists that were spending 6 are no longer spending 6, they're also spending 5. So that when you look at it, the net revenue increase is a decrease. And that's the same thing I think that we're going to find ourselves if we just move a little more cautiously in what we're doing here with regards to these revenue projections and the TEF. And are we going to end up in the same situation where the legislature passes things to repair the schools, fix Simon Sanchez from revenues that may not materialize, and we're going to find ourselves right back in here arguing, or else in the media, arguing with the governor that the money's not there, and even though he may recognize it, even though he promises he'll make up the difference, but when it comes down to it, just as the governor has broken his promise to the Department of Education, to the superintendent, and the superintendent in good faith, relying on the promise of the governor, said, don't worry about it, I know it's going to be short, or if it's short, the governor has promised to give us the money from the other sources. And when push comes to shove, that's not what's happening, and he's refusing to do so to this day, because we still are pressuring the governor, most especially because we have a surplus. We collected more revenues than we predicted in the other areas. While TEFF may be short, the revenues from the other sources were in surplus above the appropriations from those. And instead of taking that surplus and giving it to DOE to make up, to make his promise and fulfill his commitment, he decided not to and leave them short. So, again, I question some of the germaneness of the appropriations that are totally unrelated to the reconstruction of Simon Sanchez and so forth that have been adopted. And secondly, I ask the body to consider, once again, suspending discussions on these bills, leaving them on the agenda. We will continue we'll bring back in the Department of Education, we'll bring back in the Department of Administration, the Department of Revenue and Taxation, to once again verify and put on the record exactly where we're going to be on this. They have let an RFP out to solicit for the appraisal services of the triennial valuation. Should we wait until that comes in so that we have a more clear, more definitive basis? It may not be correct, but a more definitive basis for what the additional revenue increase will be from this. We may just find ourselves, for example, that some properties have been devalued. The Hilton Hotel, which may be on the record as, value of $60 million, was sold for $23 million. That's the new value. $23 million of the new owners. So you've gone from $60 million It cost $80 million to build those towers, but because of the decrease in the property and value and the depreciation expense is no longer there. It's over 20 years old, 30 years old. And the new purchase price is the value of the property, which is $23 million. We may find that we're going to collect not more revenue from that evaluation, but less revenue because it is even smaller now than what it was originally pegged at in 1993. Those are the questions that affect the revenue, and I think that it would be more prudent from this body to, again, continue the discussion. I'm not saying we're not going to act on these bills. I'm saying continue the discussion, get more definitive, and get as close to accurate estimates as we can, and adopted numbers based on other people that need to act on what we are assuming here in order to accept these things and adopt them. And so, again, Mr. Speaker, you know, I am again asking the body to consider, you know, suspending the discussions on this bill at this time while and we'll continue to have the discussions with the Department of Administration to ferret out more of these numbers, to kind of work them with there's a lot of money in the new budget request for maintenance and for capital improvement and so forth, and maybe we need a bigger bill in order to address some of those issues in the new budget year from the work that's been done by the good speaker on the initiatives that she's put forth. And I'm speaking on both 225 and 226. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator, is that a formal motion or just asking the body?
I guess I'm going to make that formal motion for consideration, Mr. Speaker.
On the motion to suspend the discussion on 225, is there an objection? There is an objection. Or do you wish to speak on it, or you're just going to object? I don't know.
Oh, there. Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, I listened intently to Speaker Pangilinan, and yeah, I have high regard for what the Speaker has to offer, and I listen intently. And many times, yes, I've actually have changed my position on a bill that was being proffered on the floor just by listening. And it's not just only the Speaker, it's everybody in here. And that's what I love about the idea that we can have this dialogue, a discussion, a debate, the recess time to even further discuss some details. And I can't speak for anyone but for myself, and this is the absolute truth, is that I do listen, and my decisions have changed. And I'd like to clarify maybe some of the things that, were said throughout and even through the public and all that. And granted, I may be wrong, and I'll be the first to admit if I am wrong. But there are some things that should be stated, is that, and the original intent of this bill, and this bill really is an amendment to an existing law. And unfortunately, because what I do not like when I see bills coming before the body that amends another law, that we don't put the content of what the bill is referencing, so that we have an idea what the content will be. It used to be that when we want to repeal something, we would just repeal the section and the title and the chapter. And that was frustrating for me because I have to go back now and find then the chapter and the title and then the content of what is in that law. And so we've evolved from that to now actually then not just listing the title, but actually putting the language, underscoring exactly what it is that's going to be new, crossing out what we want to repeal. So we've made a lot of changes and advancement in terms of how we approach now the whole idea of repealing or amending existing laws. And so in this particular case, what I've done is that I've basically put the the entire law in the bill, in Bill 225, and what it was that, and I would say is that the very first thing that we realized after it became law is that I received a phone call, yes, from the Bank of Guam, the president herself, and said that although the bill that we had passed indicated that Section 30 monies for Okado was really, that Section 30 monies for Okado was already in another bill, another law. And that what we did in this reprogramming is that inadvertently we put down that it would go to Okado. The TEFF monies will go to Okado, when in fact Section 30 monies will pay for it. And she had indicated that they are a trustee of that Section 30 monies, and that before the monies are released to the government of Guam, that then they would take off, of course, what is owed. And she indicated to me that then Section 30 monies she will definitely carve out that amount of money for Okado High School. Hence, then, that amount of $1.7 million, I think it is, I got to check, that to reprogram that now to go to Simon Sanchez High School for the renovation and or construction. And that's the change. That's the first change that I needed to do in Bill 225. The second change that I needed to do also in 225 was then to make a correction in the particular section 58C, because 58C was assigned already to the security cameras and the security cameras for DOE. And so therefore that needed to be changed now to 58D of Title V. So that's a second change. The third was because what we wanted to do is that if we were going to then do Simon Sanchez, whether it's a renovate or construct new, it was requested that we really needed to do this comprehensive study for DOE. And the superintendent has always been saying is that although Simon Sanchez is a priority, but he's also saying the other 33 schools are also a priority. And to go in and do this total renovation of the schools, that we needed this study done. So he had asked in the public hearing and in his testimony is that if then the study that was in Bill 226 could actually be deleted from there and placed in 225 to do this up front and not to do it backwards. We go and repair and we don't have a plan, but rather to have a plan and then let the plan drive what it is and set the priorities of what type of renovations should take place in the schools. So that's what then Bill 225 is about. The fourth change, which is an amendment to, and that was a testimony from the president of president of UOG, who then has been working with USDA to be able to get the loan to build then their student service center and their engineering building. And in the original law that exists today, without any amendments, actually then earmarks from the real estate property taxes, from the increase of that value, of an additional $158,000. So then it would go from $1 million to $1,158,000 and some other dollars. So that was the increase. Now to be able then to do that, and then the other is Simon Sanchez, because everybody's saying that, we need to be able to do this to take care of the school. We still aren't sure in terms of what it is exactly that should be done based on the structure of the building, and that there would be a need for, because $3 million originally that we had would not be sufficient. And in order then to provide the additional monies then for Simon Sanchez, then takes it down now to the main part of the law, which in testimonies, of course, given by the Department of Revenue and Taxation about the triennial being conducted, because everyone knows that the last triennial appraisal was done in 1993. Therefore, whatever the dollar amount is, the value amount then is the same dollar amount we're using today and collecting today. With the RFP that has gone out to be awarded, and yes, anticipating that then from that new reeval of all real estate properties, that it will definitely raise the amount. And conservatively, in Bill 3206, the amount was proffered by one of our colleagues here is to be very conservative. The amount given to the legislature was 10 million to 15 million. Our colleagues here decided then that to be very conservative about it and made it 7 million, putting a cap of 7 million. What this bill 225 will do, of course, is to increase it then from 7 million to 8.5, still being very conservative, staying way even below their low of 10, to be able then to address Simon Sanchez, the increase for Simon Sanchez High School and for the University of Guam, and also to be able to pay for the comprehensive study. So the question now, of course, has always been is that, why are we doing this when we don't really have, the monies? And Mr. Speaker, maybe this is what's really telling, of course, is that some things that we've done in the past that, we've learned from, and I surely have learned a lot from what we've done in the past, both good and bad. I've always learned to try to take some of the successes of bills that came to fruition, and I've used that to build this. And I've used those bills, the bills that we had in the past, to build then those four schools: Okudu High School, Mastumbo Middle, Liguan, and Atacao Elementary School. Very successful stories there. Now, JFK was a successful story, but then we had some hiccups on the way. And then I took that as well, the hiccups, and worked closely with the Attorney General's office and OPA then to put some of those safeguards in the bill, and that's in 225, which is also in Bill Public Law 3206. So, the changes that I told you are what in this bill, but then to talk about future appropriations based on what we learned, because the very first bill that I wanted to introduce, and as soon as we had a press conference, the Democrats had a press conference to actually let the entire island know that we were not just going to build then a new JFK, we were also going to build a public safety building and a new building for the Department of Revenue and Taxation, using the maturity of Section 30 monies. As soon as that was announced, immediately the third party, the receiver, heard of it, jumped on it, took the idea and the funding source, went to the judge, and locked in those monies. Therefore, that bill died before it could even be, that idea died before it could even be introduced as a bill. But that was a future, a couple years, 2 to 3 years down the road, in which then that Section 30 monies would have matured. So that's some of the background in terms of my madness, I suppose, in introducing the bill to do the expansion for Okudu High School, introducing the bill to build a central high school by doing a conversion of Harmon Loop Elementary School, taking advantage of the facilities, sports facilities there, that we could really reduce the government's costs. That's all, part of successes that has happened in the past, and sometimes it does not come to fruition because, like in this case, the Central High School didn't materialize because the department came out against it. JFK came out against it. Some of the residents came out against it, and so naturally the legislature responded. So here we are today, of course, with the same question, is not knowing what then, what we will realize in terms of the real property valuation, and whether in fact we will then get $10 to $15 million. But then what we're doing is trying to be a little bit more conservative here and to be more on the safe side. The other thing we all know, and this is not rocket science, of course, and we've not come down with anything that we can honestly say that when we do our budget, that we can say exactly how much that will be. Everything we receive are always projections or estimates, and we like to look into the future. And I give a lot of credit to the chairman of OFB, because he would not only get these numbers, he would actually even send his people out to do the interviews to check whether in fact more housing is coming up, are there new projects going on there, so that whether monies are really coming in. And yes, sometimes we hit it on the money, other times it's over, sometimes it's under. And and this is what it is as well. I'm sorry, it's granted an appraisal, an estimate given to us by the Director of Revenue and Taxation. And to some degree, yes, I either take the entire amount as the word of the gospel truth, or that is actually going to happen. But to err on the side of caution is that then, of course, taking the lower, more conservative number. And I know that sometimes whatever we decide to do here, whether we do this now or we do it later, as proffered by the mover of the motion, then to put it aside so we can look at the bigger picture. But because, like I said earlier, that this is an existing law and I'm amending the law, I like for it to move forward. I agree, however, and I tried to do that yesterday, is that yes, and one of my colleagues said it so well, that whenever you put something here in front of us and it involves money, we're going to go in there and try to take as much as we can for whatever pet projects we have. And it's always the decision of the majority. And I don't control the votes in the legislature, because everyone will have to make that decision. And yes, there are always other impending critical needs. We've always said that education, health, and public safety are critical. And the legislature has made that its priority. But I also know is that every time, and I took a chance, I took a risk, of course, that when this came out, as much as I would like to protect it, and as much as maybe I would like to just maybe put the bill out and not even list anything there, maybe just what it is I'm amending, I didn't feel that I'm doing any justice and or being very upfront with my colleagues by trying to hide everything else. I want them to see what they have voted before. And granted, maybe the ultimate end was that we didn't get unanimous support for this, because I know we didn't. But it was definitely more than 10 votes. There were 13 votes, as a matter of fact. But, I knew I took a risk that somebody's going to go in there now and reduce here for something else. And that's exactly what happened. And I tried to send out the message that TEFF, of course, is the Territorial Education Facilities Fund. And we've been using it to do just that. The only deviation that I made was to help then the department that is always bringing in the money for the government to continue then. We gave them money to go out and do the reevaluation. Now we're going to give them the money to make sure they are able to continue to do that on an annual basis. And of course, in the future, and I had my conversation with the chairman, is we go in there, bring them in, see where they're at, and then maybe that after they've already have set everything that they need in terms of equipment, personnel, software, and to be able to go out there and collect the money, then maybe there could be a reduction in the future once we see how that's working. And it of course, pains me to object to this, because rarely do I object to what, OD, the chairman has asked us to do, because he has this monumental task, of course, to be able to do the entire government's budget, because I surely can't, do it. I can do bits and pieces of it, and the most difficult one is actually a bill of this sort, to truly understand the mechanics of it and to be able to feel comfortable to even explain it to my colleagues so that they would then vote for it. I surely don't have the knowledge and the experience that the finance chair does. And I give him credit, for that and the hard work that is done to really, truly fund this entire government. So it is with reservations, but yes, Mr. Chairman, I'm officially then voicing my objection to that motion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Senator Nicholas, do I understand you wish to be heard on this?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm very fortunate to be able to be under the guidance and wisdom of two speakers, our current sitting speaker, our former speaker, and Senator Pangilinan. A lot of wisdom in both. And I wanted to state first that I believe Speaker Pangilinan is absolutely correct. I agree with his position. I'm not a big fan of us going out there and appropriating money that we think is going to come in that we're not even sure of. I even have reservations of the practice of us looking at revenue and seeing what's tracking and then jumping out there and appropriating what looks like it's tracking higher. I think that we could probably do a better job of, instead of rushing out to appropriate what looks like is going to be more, instead actually sequestering that, and then when it comes in and the fiscal year is at a close, we actually have realized those extra funds, then we can go ahead and appropriate what really did come in. Otherwise, if we're tracking in higher areas and other places, we should be trying to use that to make up for shortfalls in others, because a projection-based budget is always a moving target. And sometimes, as both retiring speakers mentioned, we have higher projections realized in one category and lower projections realized in another. But the current practice is, if a higher projection is projected in one category, we rush out and we try and take that for another item. And I would be more inclined to actually have us sequestering those higher numbers and then reappropriating them to make up for the shortfalls, and then seeing where we are at the end of the fiscal year. I would love for us to go in that direction. I also would love for us to go in the direction of not including prior year collections, receivables, into our current projection practices. I introduced a bill to do just that. It got vetoed, unfortunately. But we shouldn't be we shouldn't be having prior year money bumping up or projecting for the current fiscal year. I think that also should be sequestered and appropriated as a separate revenue source. And if we sequester our overages in the projection side, and if we sequester our collections from prior years, that'll give us pots of money where we can go out and begin making appropriations for real-time requirements and responsibilities in the government. So I'm very inclined to agree with Speaker Pangilinan's perspective that we need to be very cautious, especially in the current environment. In an ideal government where we have multiple branches, ideally we would want both branches of government that deal with money, the executive branch and the legislative branch, to be walking down the same road at the very least when it comes to the commitments that we both make and the follow through on both of those commitments. But when we're in an environment like we are today, where we both make the same commitments, in this case to education, but only one of us are working to try and follow through with it, then we get into this whole problem of trying to figure out how to follow through on those commitments because somebody else isn't, and then that's when it turns into the kind of politics that I feel our people are just tired of. The kind of politics where somebody says one thing and somebody says another thing, and it's just almost impossible to figure out what's true, especially in an environment where we don't have a unified financial management system, where we're not able to get an independent authority like the public auditor to look at the situation and say, this is the reality of the money. The realities right now are pretty much based on whatever somebody else says and whoever is believed at the time. And now that turns into a whole feeding frenzy where we can have a situation as we do right now where education is not getting its money. It's not meeting payroll. It's paying out net pay and it's shorting the contributions to the retirement fund and having to pay interest on that. And in that environment, the administration is saying, we have money for raises. And the legislature is sitting back here saying, where is the money going to be for that? The environment to us looks this way. It looks like there is no money for that. Or the money is not coming in the way you're saying it's going to. And then on the other side, the administration saying, oh no, the money's going to be there. And so we don't know what the realities are. The people don't know. And then we get them all caught up in their passions and we try and sweep them off their feet with these promises. While at the same time, we're shortchanging their own kids in our school system. And in the end, we divide our community down to the very basis of instincts where it's all about myself. It's all about me. Well, I want my own. And why are you getting that? And I don't deserve that. And this is how much I make. And why are you making that much? And I deserve this and you don't deserve that. And that kind of cannibalism of our community is just destroying us, Mr. Speaker. It's destroying us. And that's what happens when the two branches of government that are responsible for the people's money are not walking down the same road together. And it's sad. I would prefer that we could move forward on things like this where we can say if we're anticipating this money to come in, these are the priorities that we're going to identify. And that the governor, with his signature on those priorities, is going to actually commit to following through on those things. That's what I would love to see. That's not what we have. However, Speaker Wampat is also correct. She's also correct. This is an existing law. It's an existing law, and are we just going to let it sit on the books and have that money now go to areas where it's not appropriate or where it's no longer applicable? Or are we going to amend the existing law? And are we going to try and fix this monstrosity? At this point in time, what I would be inclined to do is go ahead and amend the law, but I would also be very inclined to follow the leadership of Speaker Pangilinan, maybe even repeal the law altogether, and maybe even come up with a more comprehensive way of trying to figure out how to manage this money more responsibly so that the promises we make to our people are not empty promises, and so that we're not using money to sweep people off their feet and captivate them with the passions that cause us to divide ourselves against each other. Division is not the direction that's going to lift up this island. It's not going to make anybody feel any better. It's only going to further polarize us and divide us, and we are not going to be the Guam that we want to be. The Guam that is united and growing together, the Guam that is making promises and keeping those promises, the Guam that doesn't shortchange health, education, and public safety, but also doesn't leave behind our employees and also doesn't leave behind the private sector. But in order for us to get there, Mr. Speaker, we're going to need to be honest, and we're going to have to manage the money the right way. And I'm very willing to, again, follow the leadership of Speaker Pangilinan to set us further on that course. But until we get there, we do have an existing law in the books that needs to be amended. And I thank the Speaker Wampat for moving us in the direction of trying to fix that portion of it. But the problem is much bigger. It's much more endemic. It's pandemic. It's an epidemic. It's a sickness of financial ruin that is dividing our community and throwing people way off base and just feeding into a selfish frenzy that isn't going to move our island forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Any other senator wish to be heard on the objection? On the motion? All right, there has been an objection to, do you wish to close?
I just want to clarify the shift of the $1.7 million. I said it was from JFK, not from JFK. The shift of the $1.7 million is from low to expansion. That project is ongoing. We have to pay in 2014.
Go on.
Here. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to clarify when I mentioned about shifting an appropriation from JFK to Sanchez. It's not JFK, it's Okudu, and it is that authority in the fiscal year 2014 budget that is being used to pay for the Okudu expansion, which has a payment due in 2014. So when you take that money now and shift it to Sanchez, it doesn't leave any money to pay the required payment for the Okudu expansion project.
You know, I do not want to ever question, of course, OB, but 9.3 of the maturity of Section 30 monies was the monies made available then to take care of JFK. JFK, yes, used over $7 million inclusive of its, you know, for the debt service. The balance of it was for Okudu High School, Section 30 monies.
All right, the motion on the floor is to suspend discussion on 225. There's been an objection. All those in favor of suspending discussion on 225, please indicate by raising your hand. Motion fails. Anyone wish to speak on the main motion? Senator Pangilinan.
Mr. Speaker, I just want to rise. I'm a little concerned about a portion of the bill which would require, from what I have read, that when we go out with an RFP for Simon Sanchez High School, that part of that RFP would be for the comprehensive capital improvement plan. Now, I don't understand the rationale behind that. Why? I think those two functions, construction, financing, whatever else that may occur with regards to Simon Sanchez, why they also have to provide comprehensive capital improvement plan and be paid for that as well. I think those are two separate projects, and I think that we shouldn't link the two. And so I don't know what the rationale is that it shall be part of the Simon Sanchez RFP. I believe they should be two separate RFPs for a professional project engineering firm to help develop the capital improvement plan, if that's the intent. And then for the construction financing of Simon Sanchez should be a completely different RFP. So, you know, it's fruitless for me to offer any amendment, but I just don't understand that rationale.
All right, I'm sorry, the chair. We shouldn't have gone back to the main motion. There was the clerk is concerned as to whether or not we adopted Project Carreno's addition, and I think we did, but just to make sure.
And I think my first question was the germaneness of these appropriations. So I guess I'm requesting the chair to rule on the germaneness of all of the appropriations not part of the original bill.
Any senator wish to be heard on the issue of germaneness in
I
defense
don't
of...
think that's a debatable issue, Mr. Speaker. Speaker on germaneness.
If it's to a title, it's...
think the will of the body is very clear. I still, raise the issue of germaneness, but I will not make it a motion that the speaker has to rule on. The will of the body is that's going to do, whatever 8 votes takes, and it's obvious that in this instance, whether or not the rules apply, they made the decision to adopt those. I don't know if anybody was advised that they were not germane at the time that we're discussing them, but they have been adopted, and so I will spare you the heartache of having to rule on the germaneness issue, given that the body has decided we're going to move with this bill anywhere. So I will withdraw the rising to the question of germaneness and let the discussion continue.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Speaker, if I may, just to maybe add a little to the discussion, because, well, I won't say anything until you're listening or until you recognize me. Okay, do you recognize me, first of all? Okay, are you recognizing me?
On what are you rising? He's withdrawn his motion on germaneness.
I don't know if it's point of order in a sense, but I think what I'm trying to say is that a decision being made here in terms of germaneness, and in this case I'm saying it's real because of the fact that what we do here in terms of any specific funding sources, that when we do this, then we have opened the doors now basically for everything. That when we do this for TFF, we do this for the Healthy Futures Fund, whether we do this for the Better Business Services Fund, all the different funds that the legislature have set aside specifically for those departments and agencies. And I just wanted
It's unfortunate that the way that the bill was written with the title that it's given, it's so all-expansive, I don't see how you couldn't include the kitchen sink. You've written the title so that it's everything. We'll take a short. I've been advised by the clerk that we still haven't resolved the issue of whether or not we're adding E. Carino as a fourth recipient in this. And is there an objection to E. Carino being a recipient? Hearing no objection. I think we've cleared every amendment so far, so any other senator wish to be heard on the main motion? Any senator wish to be heard on the main motion? Can we get Senator St. Nicholas back in? Clerk says we haven't resolved the issue of whether or not his amendment was put back in. It was approved with a motion by Senator Rodriguez yesterday. Okay. Any on the main motion then? Senator Yamashita?
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, Mr. Speaker, for allowing me the opportunity to speak on Bill 225-32. This is an effort to address issues that have been raised by our school system at a variety of levels. It is a way to capture funds that will be available in a year or two, and understanding perhaps the issues that have been raised in the last hour or so. I still stand for this measure in that as we understand and realize what our system needs, specifically with Simon Sanchez, but also all the remaining schools that have not been recently built. This measure attempts to tie in all these different aspects of education, and it is actually creative in that it includes early childhood. And I know that I've heard some on the floor saying that's not related, but it really is related in the idea that it's connected to education, that there's monies that we want to say are going to be tagged for the schooling system, beginning at the very beginning with training, then beginning with facilities, and most certainly to address the notion that we need a full master plan so that we don't Band-Aid the fixes anymore, and so that there's a whole picture and how to proceed in a smart and strategic manner. So it seems for me that every time Madam Speaker introduces something, it becomes rather contentious, and that just seems to be the practice. But I appreciate her bringing this forward, and it is a good discussion. And I do hope we get the support to tag these monies as they become available. And so with that, Mr. Speaker, I stand in full support of Bill 225. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other senator wish to be heard? Hearing none, Madam Speaker, do you wish to close?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. What I'd just like to do is just to include members who have been very supportive in working with me on this side. I know Senator St. Nicholas and Senator McCready, and in this case, a contribution of a colleague of ours, Senator Rodriguez as well, who, of course, is always looking out for the health and wellness of our school children. So, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
On the motion to send the bill down. Hearing no objection. Bill 226, Madam Speaker. You're recognized.
Thank you very much again, Mr. Speaker. To be able to make a motion to place Bill 226 on the third reading file, and if I may, be given an opportunity to explain this companion bill.
Hearing no objection.
Thank you again very much. Mr. Speaker, Bill 226 actually is a companion bill of 225. And it goes back to the same historical background in terms of the Department of Education setting Simon Sanchez High School as a priority. But more importantly, the superintendent wanted to make sure is that we actually take a holistic approach now in resolving the other maintenance and renovations and upkeep of all of our other DOE schools, the other 6 schools. I'd like to thank my colleagues who have been working very closely with me on this, and that is Senator Munyaboran, Senator Lynn Yamashita, and even another advocate I remember during a campaign was Senator Brent McCready. So that's the first amendment that I like to do, is to include him on this, as one of the other co-sponsors.
Hearing no objection.
Mr. Speaker, the intent here as well is that when you really look at all of our schools, there was some study that was conducted by the Army Corps of Engineers, and the funding was through OIA, and they've gone out and did, like a cursory, assessment of our schools, and came up with a dollar amount of about $90 million to address, the renovations of our schools. This bill then actually what it would do is that would allow for one of two things, of course, is that through 225, then the additional monies that we had set aside in 225 rather, is that the 1.7 million there then is the amount going towards Simon Sanchez High School. This is very unique in the sense, and similar to 218 of my colleague's bill, is using actually the maturing bond of the 2013 C, but it will not be until 2019. But the idea is not to use that amount in its entirety, and for the entire time of which then we would want to be able to go out and get monies to repair and maintain all the schools. What this would do only is provide a bridge only of a matter of anywhere between 2 to 3 years, depending how soon we'll be able to go out with it. What that would yield then, we're looking at, what that is $4.8 million. And what that would yield then is close to about 80 million to be able to address then the 36 schools. And although the amount by the Army Corps of Engineers was estimated at $90 million, already DOE has started to pay down and address some of those issues, and those are the entire school, all schools throughout the district. The rooftops for leakages have been already repaired. The air conditioning for the entire school system, that was also addressed. And then the third project was the Antlan Middle School in its renovation. So that has brought that $90 million down, and what we're looking at, of course, is the yielding of close to $80 million, and hopefully then is that there will be, we'll be able to get a better interest rates, and it could yield, more. And so what this then bill would do is several things then, and in terms of its funding source, like I had indicated to you, that it's dependent on, that's why I said it's a companion bill of 225, and the same thing is again amending the existing law. This is, I'm no expert, granted, and I've always been the first to amend it, but it is a creative way in which we'll be able to do a short-term bridge financing with the business privilege tax. As you know, that will not mature until 2019. But if you're able to capitalize the interest, then the monies could be available. From my understanding from bond people, is that down to 2 years, making it 2017. However, we'll still not be able to reach the goal that we would need to dollar amount to do the construction then of Simon Sanchez High School. So instead of waiting until 2019 or 2017 by bridging this with the unpledged 1% of BBT, just to pay for interest, then this will be able to kick in. The other thing that I've done here, and that's why it says amended by the author and further substituted in the floor, is that if you look at what we're doing here is a section 2, which is section 2D of Public Law 31-229, is hereby amended to read as follows. And that is D, which is the school facilities, or school shall mean those public school facilities located in TGen, including land improvements, equipment selected by the Department of Education for renovation, expansion, and rehab pursuant to this act. And these are the facilities that are located in TGen. The second amendment that I've included here, Section 3 or Section 2G, again, of Public Law 31-229, is hereby amended to read as follows. On facilities shall mean and include any school facility and any other real and or personal property, land or building owned, leased, used, or controlled by the government of Guam located in TGen. So the ultimate result then of this bill then, or this legislation, is that it will be then to renovate, rehabilitate, or construct the remaining Guam public schools. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I have Senator McCready. Any other senator wish to be heard on the bill? After Senator McCready, any other senator wish to be heard on the bill? Senator McCready, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for allowing me to speak, and thank you to the author of Bill 226 and for including me as a co-sponsor. I'd also like to thank some of the authors of Bill 218, which obviously hasn't made it on session floor, but I think it was a step in the right direction. And if you look at 226, the intent is pretty much the same thing. So, these colleagues of mine supported this bill as well. Senator Rodriguez, Senator Morrison, Senator Duenas, Senator Limtiaco, Senator Uggan, and Senator Respicio. Building a new school for Simon Sanchez shouldn't be the vision of just one person. I think rather it should be the responsibility of this entire body. It's the leadership of this legislature that should define the reality and act on something before it becomes an emergency. When we talk about Simon Sanchez High School, Mr. Speaker, it's a reality, and the reality is it's an emergency. Building a new Simon Sanchez High School should also be not the success of one person, one body, one branch of government. It should be about empowering our students and unlocking future potential students and future potential leaders by building them a safe infrastructure, which is a new school. That type of leadership, Mr. Speaker, is what I call growing others. And I believe that's what we're intending to do here today. There's an old saying that says, know the way, show the way, and go the way. And that I believe that this piece of legislation is what we call going the way. And we're leading the way. Leadership is about making other people around you better. And I believe this makes people like our students at Simon Sanchez better and safer. I also think it's very important, Mr. Speaker, to give credit where credit is due. So I commend the small but loud group of students from Simon Sanchez High School, because it was them alone. It was not us. Who created a sense of urgency for this problem at Simon Sanchez High School. Whether it was walking the shoes of a shark day, or whether it was press releases or holding banners outside the public hearing room, it was them. And I thank them and I commend them because they are why we are here this morning talking about these pieces of legislation. And obviously, by building a new Simon Sanchez High School, or any school for that matter, will ensure that we build future leaders for this community. Whether it's a politician, whether it's a leader that's going into the workforce, own a business, he or she will become a leader. And as we all know, leadership is about providing results. I support this bill 100%. I support any bill that will build a new high school, middle school, any type of education process. You know, the speaker, the retiring speaker, Madam Speaker, and the author of this bill was absolutely right. As a candidate, we had a debate at Simon Sanchez High School. She was there, I was there, and a few others from this body was there. And we promised them that we would build them a new high school. And I think by introducing this piece of legislation, by vetting the process that we have here today, ensures that we are keeping our promise, but also to note that a promise is also a process, and that things will not happen overnight, and that we have to go through the process and the proper process in order to avoid some of the mistakes that we've made before when building a new high school. I think we have worked in that manner and we have navigated our way, and each time we've built a new piece of infrastructure for our education system, it's gotten better. I do believe, forward thinking, that we need to make education infrastructure a top priority of not just this body, but our entire government. What's next after Simon Sanchez High School? We have to build a new GW High School. So I think, and obviously we don't have the funds to build two schools or even introduce legislation to build two schools in 1 year or 2 or 3 or 4 years, but we have to make it a priority. And we must lead the way we're leading today, not wait for the students to protest in order for us to be real, true leaders. So I thank the speaker, I thank Senator Muñoz-Barnes, and I thank Senator Yamashita for leading us in a direction that is a win-win situation for everyone. And when education becomes less about the department and more about the students who are inside those classrooms, then I think we as a legislature, as a body, as a branch of government, has done our jobs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator McCready. Any other senator wish to be heard on the bill? Senator Muñoz-Barnes. After Senator Muñoz-Barnes, anybody else?
Promise, Mr. Speaker, I'll be short. I just want to stand and rise in support of 226S32 and thank the good co-sponsors, the Speaker and Senator Yamashita, for having me work closely with them on this matter, and more importantly, just to make sure that we clarify that the previous bill on the public law on 31229, if I'm not mistaken, is that would work with TDN alone, but this bill would give the opportunity, like the retiring speaker said, to make sure that as we look at giving education its facility needs, that we take care, that we give them the resources to fix all the other schools and to make sure that our students have a facility that is safe, and that if there's rehabilitation or renovations or maintenance that are needed, that resource would be there from that. So again, as I promised to be very short, I stand in full support. I want to thank the Speaker and Senator Yamashita for giving me the opportunity to work closely with them as the Chair and Vice Chair on Education. So, Sana Masi.
Thank you very much. Any other senator wish to be heard on the bill? Senator Pangilinan.
Thank you, Mrs. Masi. Mr. Speaker, I rise with the same concerns with regards to acting on this bill at this time, as I did for 225. I really think that, given, again, we're looking at the Department of Education coming back. This is for, of course, Simon Sanchez, maintenance of the schools, all of the other requirements of the schools, and we find that those requests are being asked by the Department of Education in the 2015 budget. And whether or not we should kind of integrate those two processes so we are able to make these commitments. Basically what the bill does, if I can summarize this, is that it's lease and lease back legislation that is very similar to what 225 proposes to do. 225, pledges the additional revenue from the property reevaluation, while Bill 226 pledges the 1% of the 4%. If you recall, this body passed a bill that would go and borrow the income tax refund payments that we owed of over almost $350 million, and pledge and set aside the 75% of the business privilege tax, formerly known as the gross receipts tax, sets aside 75% we cannot touch until we make those payments to the bond, and they are sufficient. And only then can we access the additional monies generated by that. We cannot increase obligations of the business privilege tax. We cannot increase tax credits. We cannot increase anything that currently exists at the time those bonds were floated that would impair and reduce the taxing authority against the business privilege tax. And so we've been kind of limited to anything that we pledge to the 1% of this. 4.8 of the business, and which 4.8% of what we're saying today is the result of the maturing of some bonds pegged to that 1%, the 25%, in fiscal year 2019, almost 5 years from now. So again, it's the future dollars out there. But the problem is that 1% or the 25% of the total collections pays for current operations of the government of Guam. So what we're doing is, again, making the decision to do something in the future when we don't know that money is going to be there based upon the collections. We have been pledging that 1% at this time, and we're trying to quantify exactly what that number is. And so 1.2 million of the revenues received from the additional result of the property reevaluation, again, is part of the pledge to finance this borrowing. We're borrowing more money. That's really what we're doing once again, Mr. Speaker. And we're trying to figure out a way to get around all of the limitations that we set, including the debt limit, when we borrow this money. So while we may figure out a way to get around increasing our debt capacity outside of the debt limitation and outside of the bond covenants with regards to that 1% and the 3%, we're not figuring out how are we going to pay for it. What additional collection has to occur in order to pay for it? So we're very kind of creative on getting around the limitations of how much we can borrow, but we are completely in the dark and providing no solution to how we're going to pay for those obligations. And that's the missing component of this. We're saying, don't worry about it, we'll do it 5 years from now when this bond matures. The problem is that what we are doing today and what the governor is committing to doing today is we are committing to increasing the cost of the daily operations of this government today. Additional law enforcement, another $20 million in payroll costs going forward. So while we may have a maturing of $4.8 million, and that $4.8 million is freed up in 2019, next year we have $20 million in our operational costs. just for law enforcement alone. Haze study, maybe another $20 million, $40 million that we're going to increase in our operational cost. The organic growth of increments, another $5 million. The debt service increase that we have not been making payments on the principal are going to kick in next year, $10 million. The year after that, another $20 million. So by the time we get to 2019, we would have increased the cost, the daily operation of the government, salaries, not things we can control. Salaries, we would have increased the cost of operating our government, maybe $80 million. What kind of growth do we have in our economy to support that without increasing taxes? Because nobody wants to do that. So just China, so that means almost a 10% growth in our economy, in our revenue collections, not the economy. It'll be a requirement of almost an extra $1 billion to $2 billion in economic activity to support the increase in the revenue, to support the daily operations of this government. Even China, is probably the only economy in the world that has grown its economy in that kind of a percentage, and they control everything. We don't control our own tax code. We don't control, the Japanese yen and the exchange rates and things like that. China controls the rate against the yuan. They can manipulate that to influence how much they grow or how much they retract in expenditures by manipulating the exchange rates of their currency. We can't do that. So we really are dependent on decisions outside ourselves with regards to that. We're going to issue QCs in probably the next few weeks that will take away $179 million in revenue and give up $400 million in tax credits, in rebates to one entity here on Guam, according to the analysis. Or I think it's the reverse. We're going to hand it out, and they say they're going to contribute $400 million to the economy. But that's not $400 million in taxes. That's just $400 million in economic activity. 4%, and what does that generate in taxes? Maybe $40 million. But we're giving away $179 million in rebates. So those, the things that we can control, we're not helping ourselves. We're digging ourselves into a bigger hole in those kind of issues. And so, again, the concern I have is that, so both 225 and 226, will use the same funding source as a pledge for the leaseback financing. And we are concerned about overextending the 1% of the 4% with the increase in the business privilege tax as a result of the Cortec amendment. The Cortec lease purchase is going to increase what that 1% is now pledged for. And now we're adding another pledge on that. So how much left is there to pledge? And after we pledge all of these things for these specific purposes, how much is left of that 1% to help support government operations and the 10, 20, 60 incremental cost over the years until we get to 2019? So those are, again, the issues I raised with regards to this bill and so forth. We're concerned about the TEFF collections. Collections for the education fund, the TEFF, continues to fall short by about $7 million. That's the tracking we've been able to do. That is going to fall short again this year, despite the governor's assurances that the escape assessment is going to be in there. And they said escape assessment this year, they said should generate that $7 million. It's not tracking to that effect. The December payments came in because they were billed and they're due in February 20th of this month. So we'll see what kind of collections based on the addition of the escape assessment and whether or not they're going to come. But from what we have seen, they're not tracking. The special fund tracking continues to show a projected enhancement on its report of $7 million. So they even separate that out from the regular collections, saying, maybe we better track this and see if it's coming in because we don't believe it. Without the projected revenue enhancement, collections from the TEFF is projected to be only $20 million. $480,000, well short of the expectations. And we had yet to receive the property tax rolls to verify this projected revenue enhancements. We have asked for the property tax rolls to show, in fact, that the escape assessments have been added to the tax rolls and that they are being billed. Because if they're not added to the tax rolls and they're not being billed, we're not going to collect that money. And so that's what we're trying to. Affordability, again, I go back. Can we afford more borrowing, even, especially after the Cortec deal? That's an additional $10 million of hit we're going to take. $8 million this year, $6 million next year. It reduces because of the collateral equipment, but the year after that it goes up to 10.1. So we're increasing it against the revenue source that we're pledging to pay for this borrowing. Is it enough? Can we do it? We don't know. Does it circumvent the debt limit, the debt limitations? Because the Cortec thing is on a tax credit. Can we borrow this money? Is another question that I think is still up and open for discussion. We know that GIDA has not even bothered to talk to bond counsel on whether or not the debt limitation is being impacted by some of the decisions we are making today, and so forth. And so we got nothing from GIDA on this issue with regards to the debt limitation. We attempted to solicit the opinion of the bond counsel. He came back making a response that he's not going to respond in that way. So with the increase in the personnel costs as a result of the case study and law enforcement raises, what's the impact on this? With the income tax refund, permanent injunction to pay for tax refunds in a timely manner, cash has to be set aside in order to make those payments. And then what's the debt service payments increasing to, will be increasing by over $10 million next year for debt service, not the operational costs of the law enforcement and the Hayes study. With GMH issuing an additional $13 million that has to be paid out of the Healthy Futures Fund that funds our public agencies. What's the impact of that on shortages there that have to be made up with collections elsewhere once the cash goes into the general fund and gets commingled? And I know that's one of your main issues is especially with the tax credits, where we actually said that the tax credit should be against the business privilege tax, and yet when it was transferred to another agent, to another entity in the private sector took that tax credit that should have been deducted from the business privilege tax and was deducted from the Healthy Futures Fund, leaving short funding on the Healthy Futures Fund, which should be completely separate for cancer programs, medicine at GMH, and other funding priorities that have been placed by this body. So all of these questions remain to be answered in this. And once again, I raised them, and if the body wishes to proceed, then I guess that's the will of the body to ignore some of these concerns, to maybe not give deference to the work that we have done at the Office of Finance and Budget and the Committee on Appropriations as to the questions we raised that we believe should be answered before we proceed on this bill. And once again, we reported the bill out in order to provide some to respond to the author, and the body has decided to take it up. These are the concerns we place. We think it's, again, I stand in the same position on 226 as I do in 225, that we really should suspend discussions on this. But I'm not going to make that motion, and just ask the body that when they vote on this bill, as they discuss it, I'm wishing everyone would get up and talk on this bill to let the public know why are they going to vote for this, and that these concerns are not real or legitimate concerns in their mind. And I will respect that opinion. But when you just kind of sit back in silence and say, I'm not going to do it, there's no accountability. There's no accountability to the general public when we make these decisions. because we don't express the rationale and the reason for casting the votes the way we do. That's why sometimes, people say, Ben, why do you talk on almost every bill? I said, because I think I want the public to know the thinking process and the considerations I have had. And in some instances, I get up to repeat what they tell me as their concerns and articulate the fact that I've taken those concerns, considered them, and made the decision that I make with their input in a lot of instances. And that they can now say, that's what you based your decision on, I can agree with you or not. But if we just kind of hide behind silence, then we're not doing our job, and we're not acting with the transparency that the general public deserves for them that put us in here in terms of how we should carry out our responsibilities. Maybe we just have a different philosophy on transparency. Maybe we have a different philosophy on openness. Maybe we have a different philosophy on accountability. But I think the public should know that. Thank you, and Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. Senator Nicholas, and after him, any other senator wish to be heard on the bill?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just had a question that I'm trying to work out with the author, and I can go ahead and pose it to her on the record, and then we can see where we go from there. But with respect to Bill 226, on page 6, we've taken out the entire area referencing a programming study. And in my conversations with the author, the reason why this section is being removed is because it's addressed in 225. But my concern is it's assuming that 225 and 226 both pass together. But there's a possibility that 225 might not pass, or there's a possibility that 225 might get vetoed. And so I want to make sure that the elements that are contained here in this program study reference on page 6 on Bill 226 are still going to happen even if something were to happen to Bill 225. And so I guess I'm going to ask the author if she would be so kind as to yield as to how we can make sure that no matter what happens with 225, the intent of a program study as outlined in 226 is conducted. And just for the benefit of the record, this program study that is covered in Bill 225 that we're taking out of Bill 226 would require the Department of Education to look at a lot of very important things. It'll require them to look at the different priorities, the desired curriculums and programs offered, the population densities, the student counts and the population projections, the transportation, the traffic and the busing logistics, and the estimated cost of repair of buildings based on the condition of assessments. And all of that will need to be factored into any future capital improvement projects. And I think that those are all very important. And based on my conversations with the author, that is kind of covered in language that's in Bill 225. But I'm kind of worried about, depending on 225 in order to make sure that happens in 226. So I'd like to yield to the author to, I guess, help clarify how we can make sure that that still is covered in the event that 226 as a standalone bill were to become law in the absence of 225.
Madam Speaker, do you yield?
Yes, and thank you very much. And yes, we had started the conversation. There is an existing law, I don't have the number of it, that Senator Yamashita and Senator Tom Ada had proffered in the last legislature, and it passed, basically calling for a comprehensive capital improvement plan to be conducted by, at that time in their bill, it was for a public-private partnership, but it required, of course, there was no funding source for that. But we knew then now that in the request that the superintendent wanted this study to be done before then, for all the 36 schools, had asked if we could put it in the front end before this to make sure then that the funding will be available as they go out to, to take it out to the bond market. What we did do here, so we deleted all that provision and put it in 225. What we did do, because that's existing rather, we didn't have to restate everything. But what we did do is to come up with this definition of a comprehensive capital improvement plan, primarily because, if you read it, it means a plan that will take now into consideration the physical condition of not just the school, but they must also look at attendance, area populations, enrollment patterns, and busing logistics. This has been one of the most difficult thing, I suppose, for the department to do. And I don't know, maybe because it's an unpopular issue. Nobody wants to be moved and realign the lines in villages as to what schools they're going to, or redistricting somehow seems to be, a scary word to use, and not maximizing full utilization of our facilities. And this has been something, of course, that we've always been asking ourselves, why? So that is one new component to the comprehensive capital plans, to make sure that as we plan and as we prioritize, and that should help the superintendent to prioritize repairs, that they take those things into consideration, and maybe the law would even give them the strength to be able then to do that. So, and if somebody else does it, then I guess they'll just say they're following the law. So I understand the fear that would happen, that what if 225 was vetoed, but because of that existing law already where that plan should be done, what we're doing in 226 then is now defining it even further to include population and enrollment and busing. So I hope I was able to answer your question.
Senator Nicholas, does that address your concerns?
A little bit, Mr. Speaker. If I could get guidance from legal counsel, if we were to take, because based on what the speaker shared, then in 225, which is what she read what she read when she was presenting, in 225, that single definition of a comprehensive capital improvement plan is all that's necessary to make all the other provisions of law that already exist applicable. And so would there be a problem for us to restate that exact definition in 226? And in the event that both passes, obviously we wouldn't have any issue there. So I would, I guess, like to proffer an amendment subject to legal counsel interpretation to add a new section 2 on page 13, because I believe that the entire thing is a section 1. So add a new section 2, and then if the clerks can just assist, it's basically a transposition of the language on Bill 225, page 4, lines 23 to 27, and page 5, lines 1 through 7. And basically what this does, Mr. Speaker, is it just restates the same definition in 226. That way, in the event that something were to happen to 225 and it doesn't become law, we still address the need for a comprehensive capital improvement plan in the Department of Education in 226. Is the clerk okay with that? Okay.
I believe that's clear enough. And did you wish to be heard on the amendment?
Can I just maybe, I understand, but on the amendment basically, I'm just wondering is that what if we made a reference to that specific law itself, the existing law, rather than having listing everything here and make that reference to what he is trying to say. That was a question that legal counsel presented to me, so I'm wondering maybe a brief recess so we can have that conversation with legal counsel.
Legislature's back in session. I understand, Majority Leader, you have,
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker and colleagues. I want to thank the author of Bill 226 for agreeing that notwithstanding the House rules that we suspend discussion on this bill and that we reorder the second reading file to bring Resolution 234-32 up as well as Resolution 279-32, that we can dispose of these two resolutions hopefully prior to recessing for lunch. One is the WICHI...
yes, I understand. Are we planning on voting on those before this afternoon?
No, but just so that we don't spend time on recess discussing Bill 226, that we can facilitate these two other items on the
Fine.
second.
Send them when you want on your motion, on your resolution. Oh, okay. Senator McCready.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Senator Respicio. On September, and I'll make this really quick, on September 25th, I introduced Resolution 234, which, if passed, would show the legislature's support of Guam's effort to becoming a member of the Western Interstate Commissions for Higher Education. Short term for that is WICHI. We held a public hearing for this resolution in which testimony was in favor of Guam's participation in this program. WICHI is a multi-state commission made up of 15 western states, with Guam and the CNMI, American Samoa, the Federated States of Micronesia, Palau, and the Marshall Islands. Collectively, they as one make up the 16th member. Now, WICHI has a number of programs and initiatives that have the potential to provide additional educational opportunities for our undergraduates and graduate students of over 150 institutions of higher learning in hundreds of programs. Now, I amended the original intent of my resolution, and all I did was, instead of us dictating policy to the University of Guam, I added an amendment that would then allow the Board of Regents to adopt this resolution as well. So this is the process, Mr. Speaker, that is mandated by WICHI. It must go through a resolution process minimum through the legislature and then through the governor to get it passed and for us to become a member. So I went an extra step and amended it to say that we also would like to get the input and the okay from the Board of Regents from University of Guam. That was the pushback coming from the two higher institutions of education here on Guam. So we amended that, and we think that that should be the, I guess, the sweet spot, so to speak, of getting this thing passed and hopefully one day allowing for tuitions to decrease if, in fact, that somebody from Guam would like to pursue in higher education off-island. I would absolutely like to thank UOG and GCC for being excellent institutions and growing as institutions. And so I know some of my colleagues would like to speak on this, but I asked them for their support in this, and I think it's going to affect us positively in the future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Senator Yamashita, you wish to be heard on this? Any other senator? Speaker after Senator Yamashita.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there's actually a substitute version, because I know when I signed off on the committee report, there was, but I do not believe we have the resolution as substituted. And the reason why I know we don't have that is because there were two items that Dr. Okada and Dr. Underwood made real clear, and that was...
Thank you. All right, we're going to lunch.